What's an article? What's an article? I was asking myself this very question in the post office yesterday, standing in line waiting to sign for, as it so happens, an article, a postal article, not the postal article. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, an article in English is a word that precedes a noun and simply indicates specificity. This sounds quite complicated, and to be honest, it's quite complicated to say without spraying everyone within 15 feet, but the concept's quite simple. The definite article in English is the word the and indicates a specific thing or type. For example, the train is an hour late. By contrast, the indefinite article in English is any of the words a, an, or some, and the indefinite article indicates a nonspecific thing. For example, would you please pass me an apple? We always precede a word with a if it doesn't start with a vowel sound. For example, take a hike. I'm spending a weekend at Bernie's. Or there's a knight in shining armor. Similarly, we precede words with the indefinite article an if they do start with a vowel sound. For example, an ostrich, an enormous mess, or an occupational health and safety policy.
Height is correlated with a lot of things. Up to a certain height, taller people make more money than the vertically challenged, and the taller presidential candidate almost always wins. Now a study finds that your height as an adult has a profound effect on your perception of your health. Short people judge their health to be worse than average or tall people judge theirs. The research was published in the journal Clinical Endocrinology. Data for the study came from the 2003 Health Survey for England. More than 14,000 participants filled out questionnaires and had their heights measured. The study only looked at how good the subject thought his or her health was, not their actual health. Questions focused on 5 areas: mobility, self-care, normal activities, pain or discomfort, and anxiety or depression. Men shorter than about 5'4" and women shorter than 5 feet reported the worst impressions, but small increases in height at the low end had much bigger effects on perception than the same increases among taller people. Other studies have shown, ironically, that shorter people on average actually live longer. Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Steve Mirsky.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Tech. I'm Larry Greenmeyer. Got a minute? Our skin tells us about our surroundings by detecting temperature, pressure, and other external conditions. If a pot handle is too hot to touch, we can feel this heat before burning our hand. Robots may someday have this protection too. A team of researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, has developed a large area sensor network integrated into a thin plastic film that acts like an electronic skin. They demonstrated the concept with an e-skin sample about the size of a postage stamp that lights up in the specific places it's touched. The work is in the journal Nature Materials. The harder the e-skin gets pressed, the brighter the light. The researchers envisioned that flesh and blood users could have an e-skin smart bandage that monitors wounds. A large sheet of the material covering the wall of a room could even operate like a display screen, and a robot with such a surface could more effectively interact with its environment. Of course, we don't want our robots to be too sensitive. Then they might balk at cleaning up nuclear waste or spending years at a time alone on Mars.
I've still got the greatest enthusiasm and confidence in the mission.
Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American's 60-Second Tech, I'm Larry Greenmeyer.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. This'll just take a minute. A book a day may keep dementia away, even if you read it as a kid, because a study finds that exercising the brain, at any age, may preserve memory. The work appears online in the journal Neurology. Previous studies have shown that engaging in brain-building activities is associated with a delay in late-life cognitive decline. But why? Does flexing the old gray matter somehow buffer against age-related intellectual impairment, or is cognitive loss simply a consequence of the aging brain's physical decline? To find out, researchers questioned nearly 300 elderly individuals about their lifelong participation in intellectual pursuits, like reading books, writing letters, and looking things up in the library. Then, every year, for an average of 6 years until they died, the subjects took tests to measure their memory and thinking. What the researchers found is that folks who worked their mental muscles, both early and late in life, remained more intellectually limber than those who didn't, even when a post-mortem look at their brains revealed the telltale signs of physical decline. So if you're headed to the beach, don't forget a hat and a book, both to protect your head. Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin. This is Scientific American's 60-Second Mind. I'm Karen Hopkin. Got a minute? The mayor of New York famously tried to ban supersized sodas. But instead of legislating a drink's volume, maybe we should change its name, because a new study shows that the words we use to describe portion size affect how much we actually consume. The findings are in the journal Health Economics. As portion sizes at many restaurants grow larger, so do our waistlines. Of course, no one says we have to finish that 3/4-pound burger or chug an entire big gulp, but what determines when we lay down the fork and push away from the table? To find out, researchers led by Brian Wansink of the Cornell Food and Brand Lab served up some spaghetti. Some volunteers received a portion labeled regular. Others got a dish described as double size. Although both plates contained the same amount of pasta, people ate more when they thought their serving size was normal. Participants who thought they'd gotten the piggy-sized portion left 10 times more food on their plates. So if a big beverage were called, say, double the size of your stomach, maybe we'd think twice about draining every last drop. Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American's 60-Second Mind, I'm Karen Hopkins.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Sophie Bushwick. Got a minute? Everywhere you go, the trillions of microbes in your gut go too. And that's a comforting thought, because according to a new study, a more diverse population of intestinal bacteria is linked to better health. The work is in the journal Nature. Danish researchers gathered gut microbes from almost 300 obese and non-obese adults. The intestines of roughly 1 in 4 participants contained fewer and less diverse bacteria than average, and members of this group were more likely to be obese and to suffer from gut inflammation. By looking for only a few specific bacteria, researchers could predict whether a subject fell into the low-diversity group. Certain species could even indicate whether an individual was slim or overweight, and these microbial markers might also serve as signs of future health risks, because low-diversity participants who were obese were more likely to gain additional weight over time. But a low-diversity gut won't necessarily doom your health. According to another study in the same journal, it's possible to increase microbial diversity by developing a decent diet. Remember, you're eating for trillions. Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American 60-Second Science, I'm Sophie Bushwick.
Maybe this will motivate you to work out. New research supports the idea that you don't need to spend hours at the gym every day for your body to start feeling the positive effects of exercise. In fact, a single session on a stationary bike can affect your very DNA. Okay, so your actual genetic code won't morph into that of Conan the Barbarian. But exercise sets signals in motion almost instantly that determine which genes get turned on and off. These, what are called epigenetic changes, signal to the muscles to, well, tone up. The study is in the journal Cell Metabolism. Researchers recruited 14 men and women in their mid-20s who didn't usually exercise. After a short but intense spin on a bike, samples of their muscle tissues showed temporary but big changes in several types of epigenetic signals. Further tests showed that some of the same effects could be achieved with a jolt of caffeine. Alas, black coffee can't provide all the benefits of your morning workout. But if you get to the nearest coffee shop by running, you're definitely starting out on the right foot.
Flaming cauldrons of molten metal have long been the primary venues for steel production, but blast furnaces require a lot of coal, which means greenhouse gas pollution. In fact, worldwide, steelmaking is responsible for 5% of annual emissions. But scientists working on a way to harvest oxygen from the iron oxide in lunar soil for future moon bases realized that they happened on a better way to make steel here on Earth. The trick? Produce steel the way we make aluminum. Use electricity rather than flame. To make steel the old-fashioned way, you blast iron ore with heat and purify the resulting molten metal with oxygen. The process removes carbon from the steel but produces carbon dioxide. Making a ton of steel releases roughly 2 tons of CO2, and the world uses a lot of steel in cars, buildings, and other infrastructure. The new method involves passing a current through a molten pool of iron oxide, which drives off the originally sought-after oxygen. The byproduct is steel, and depending on the source of the electricity, the process could be nearly CO2-free, which, as far as the atmosphere is concerned, would be very cool.
Our universe has long passed for a 13.7 billion year old, but it turns out it's really a bit more elderly. So says new data from the European Planck satellite.
Compared to the previous best measurements, the universe is a little older, 13.8 billion years.
U.S. project scientist Charles Lawrence of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in a March 21st press briefing.
It's expanding a little more slowly. There's more matter, both the kind that we're made of that we can see, and the dark kind that we can't see, but that has gravity to pull things around.
The Planck satellite maps the cosmic microwave background, the faint afterglow of the Big Bang, and that lets cosmologists look back to the very dawn of the universe.
The variations from place to place in the map that Planck has made tell us new things about what happened just 10 nanoseconds after the Big Bang, when, in a gazillion times less time than it takes me to say this, the universe expanded by 100 trillion times.
It's been said that the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine. For a brief moment, it was the robot king of Mars. Then it shut down unexpectedly and was lost for good. Back in 1971, the Soviet lander Mars 3 scored the first soft landing on the red planet, but it operated for only about 15 seconds and then failed. Since that time, Mars 3 has been little more than a historic interplanetary paperweight, its exact resting place unknown. Now a team of amateur researchers may have located the defunct lander. Using imagery taken by NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2007, the searchers spotted an object that could be Mars 3. Nearby, they also turned up what may be the lander's descent module and heat shield, as well as an unusually bright spot that could be the parachute. All 4 items are in the expected landing area. A follow-up photo of the region acquired by the NASA orbiter in March has strengthened the case, but the researchers will keep poring over the available imagery to make sure. Unfortunately, there's no way to get a closer look, because the current robot king of Mars, the Curiosity rover, is thousands of kilometers away.
Learning a new language can grow one's perspective. Now scientists find that learning languages grows parts of the brain. Scientists studied the brains of students in the Swedish Armed Forces Interpreter Academy who are required to learn new languages at a very fast rate. Many must become fluent in Arabic, Russian, and the Persian dialect Dari in just 13 months. The researchers compared the brains of these students to the brains of medical students who also have to learn a tremendous amount in a very short period of time, but without the focus on languages. The brains of the language learners exhibited significant new growth in the hippocampus and parts of the cerebral cortex. The medical students' brains showed no observed growth. The study was in the journal Neuroimage. Interestingly, the amount of growth in the brains of the linguists correlated with better skills. So those with better language skills also experienced more growth in the hippocampus and areas of the cerebral cortex that relate to language. For other students who had to work harder to improve their language skills, the scientists found greater growth in the motor area of the cerebral cortex. Where and how much change takes place in the brain are linked to how easily one picks up a language, but it remains to be seen why this is.
It's springtime, and that means mud pies, bug bites, and scraped knees, if you're a preschooler. Or at least it used to. Health experts say young children should get at least an hour of physical activity a day, and studies have linked more time outside with motor development, improved mental health, better behavior, and of course, more sun-supplied vitamin D. But a new study of nearly 9,000 U.S. children found that almost half of preschool-aged kids are not getting outside at least once a day with their parents. Girls were even less likely to be taken outside than boys, and some families reported not taking their young children outside more than a few times a month. The findings are in archives of pediatric and adolescent medicine. Kids who had daycare were slightly less likely to get the time outside with a parent. They were also unlikely to get the recommended minimum 1 hour of physical activity while at daycare. So researchers recommended checking in with care providers about time outside. 1 hour out of 24 isn't too much to ask, right?
A Venezuelan oil minister once referred to his country's main export as the devil's excrement. We'll see how the death of Hugo Chavez affects production levels of this Faustian fuel, which influences both the global oil market and the climate. Venezuela's oil has problematic qualities. The thick, tar-like oil requires extra heat to flow. Once finally on the move, it's fed to refineries where the heavy oil must be what the engineers call cracked. That chemical process removes excess carbon and readies the oil to be turned into the petroleum products we all use, from gasoline to plastics. The extra carbon, known as petcoke, is often burned and is more highly polluting than even coal. These issues affect more than Venezuela. The Keystone XL pipeline is a bid in part to bring oil from Canada's tar sands to some refineries on the Gulf Coast that can handle it precisely because they were built to handle Venezuela's tarry mix. If more Venezuelan oil begins to flow, the Keystone pipeline might prove extraneous. But whether Canadian tar sands or Venezuelan heavy crude, more thick oil means more CO2 in the atmosphere, and that means a climate ever more hellish.
Ordinarily, you'd call a pistachio, but if you're, for example, an immigrant from China and you've just seen a Ming vase, you might call a pistachio a happy nut, because visual cues can affect language in people with multiple cultural experiences. That's according to a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Researchers performed various tests with students who had come to the U.S. from China. In one, the students heard a recorded conversation in English about campus life. But some looked at a Chinese face while they listened, while others saw a Caucasian face. The students then spoke about their own lives, and the Chinese-American students who had listened while looking at a Chinese face spoke English more slowly and less fluently than those who listened while looking at the Caucasian face. In another test, when the students were exposed to Chinese icons, they were more likely to translate from Chinese into English literally. Thus, pistachios became happy nuts, which is the name in China. This phenomenon demonstrates that immigrants struggling with a new language can face unusual and unanticipated challenges, and that what you see can affect what you say.
Saturn's rings and moons are a diverse group, but some of their differences are only skin deep. A new analysis of the Saturnian system shows that the planet's rings and satellites have at least one compositional characteristic in common. They appear uniformly stocked with water ice, dating from their formation in the early solar system. Researchers examined 6 years of Saturn observations from NASA's Cassini orbiter, which can detect ice as well as the colorful contaminants that obscure it, such as iron or hydrocarbons. The inner moons are largely devoid of such coloration, thanks to a fresh coat of icy material that spews out from the moon Enceladus. And the outer moons are dusted with dark stuff, which looks to be debris from Phoebe, a dark-colored lump of a moon. But underneath those surface differences is a uniform distribution of water ice, which seems to reflect the common origins of the moons and rings billions of years ago. The research appears in the Astrophysical Journal. The rings and moons, polluted and tinted though they may be now, therefore appear to preserve a record of their beginnings, frozen in time and space.
Can you train someone to be a nicer person? Well, a recent study using meditation techniques shows that it might be possible. One group of subjects learned to practice what's called compassionate meditation by focusing on a specific person while repeating a phrase like, "May you be free from suffering." The subjects concentrated on 5 different people: a loved one, a friend, themselves, a stranger, and then someone they were in conflict with. Another group of subjects performed general positive thinking. Both groups did the exercise for 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks. Then everyone was asked to spend money to help a fictional character who had been treated unfairly, and the subjects who did compassionate meditation were more likely to spend their money to help than those who trained to just think more positively. The researchers also did brain scans of those who behaved most altruistically before and after training, and people who were most altruistic after training showed the biggest increase in activity in brain areas involved in empathy and positive emotion. So empathy appears to be like a muscle. It can be built up by exercise that causes actual physiological changes.
Back in 1958, at the dawn of the space age, physicist James Van Allen discovered that the Earth is ringed by high-energy charged particles. Held in place by the planet's magnetic field, these bands of radiation were named the inner and outer Van Allen belts. They're of particular interest to NASA as they pose a potential danger to spacecraft. Now a NASA mission also named for Van Allen has found something new about his belts. By looping through them repeatedly, the twin Van Allen probes discovered a third band of radiation, or at least there were 3. The 2 spacecraft uncovered the previously unknown structure in September. It consisted of fast-moving electrons situated between the 2 previously known Van Allen belts. The discovery was reported in the journal Science. But the new structure is no longer. 4 weeks after the probes found it, the third ring was wiped out by a strong shockwave emanating from the sun. Still, the unexpected finding shows that the Van Allen belts are more complex and variable than had been assumed, and that seemingly well-established knowledge about space still may have the capacity to surprise. The search for habitable, Earth-like planets keeps turning up promising candidates. And although astronomers have yet to find an Earth twin, some newly discovered worlds are pretty interesting in their own right. NASA's Kepler Space Telescope recently spotted 7 new exoplanets, 3 of them in or near their star's so-called habitable zones. That's the temperate region where a planet could accommodate liquid water. But all 3 worlds are bigger than Earth, and their composition is uncertain. They could be rocky like Earth, or water worlds without land masses. The discoveries are in the journal Science and in the Astrophysical Journal. The planet Kepler-69c follows a Venus-like orbit around a Sun-like star. Kepler-69c could be habitable, or it could be a bit too hot, depending on how much starlight the planet absorbs. Kepler-62e and 62f are smaller and orbit a star smaller than the Sun. One planet receives about 60% less radiation than warms Earth, and the other gets about 20% more. It's possible that those attributes render Kepler-62e or 62f habitable, but astronomers don't yet know whether they are too cold, too hot, or just right.
Want to remember something? Well, sleep on it. A recent study finds that the more we value a piece of information, the more likely we'll review it during our sleep. And because we do that, we'll tend to remember it. Participants were shown objects with different corresponding dollar amounts on a computer screen. If participants could remember that object later on a test, they were rewarded with the associated dollar amount. Objects were also accompanied by an associated sound. For instance, a cat was accompanied by a... After either a 90-minute nap or wake period, subjects' memory for low-value objects was worse than for high-value objects. But in a second experiment, associated sounds were played either when the subjects were awake or asleep as a way to trigger the memory of the object. Researchers found that low-value objects were better remembered when the associated sound was played during the subject's sleep as opposed to when they were awake. The authors believe that during sleep is when we tend to go over the day's new information. So that is why they could manipulate the memory storage of lower value objects during sleep time rather than wake time. Gives new meaning to the term sound asleep.
A good cup of coffee can get you out of bed in the morning, but for heart patients, coffee is often on the list of things to avoid. The American Heart Association advises that it might increase the risk of heart failure, but a new report suggests that moderate coffee drinking could actually lower the odds of heart failure. The findings are in the journal Circulation. Researchers pored through 5 studies that followed more than 140,000 European adults and included information about coffee intake. People who drank about 16 ounces of coffee a day, a grande in Starbucks speak, had about an 11% reduction of the risk of heart failure. People who drink coffee also seem to have less type 2 diabetes, another risk factor for heart disease. But that doesn't mean it's time to start ordering the venti. In the studies, people who consumed more than 40 ounces a day were at an increased risk for heart failure. More research should filter out the best info, which will percolate down to the public.
A federal judge has dismissed a lawsuit against 5 major oil companies for their role in climate change. The lawsuit was brought by New York City against Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, BP, and Shell. The New York Times reports the city's case was considered a long shot and hinged on a state law allowing courts to hold certain parties responsible for interfering with property use. New York City said the companies needed to pay them for damage done by flooding, extreme weather, and other effects of climate change. The judge dismissed the case Thursday, saying the issue of climate change wasn't one for the courts and should be left up to Congress and the executive branch to deal with. A similar case brought by the cities of San Francisco and Oakland, California, was also dismissed last month. The judge in that case also said the issue of climate change was for the other branches of government to deal with.
For some people, this proposition may seem far-fetched, but ending poverty is both morally necessary and actually feasible. All of us must play a role in making it happen. All human beings want, and have a right to live in dignity, to determine our own destinies, and to be respected by other people. Despite the universality of these rights, our capacities to fulfill them vary enormously, and no dividing line is more profound in influencing the quality of our lives than the gulf between poverty and prosperity. Well, there's a positive obligation on the bank to ensure that the people who are signing a loan guarantee know what they're doing. Loan guarantees are kind of unique in that someone is giving security or a guarantee and placing themselves at risk for someone else, and they receive nothing material in return. So you've got to ask yourself, why is this person doing this? Do they know what they're doing? They're risking a lot, and not really getting anything back for it. So the imperative is that the bank must ensure that these people know what they're doing, and that they fully understand the implications of what they're doing, and they know that their properties may be sold if another person doesn't meet their obligations.
There's an old-timer in the neighborhood, and it's got a story to tell. A new study of a relatively nearby star shows that it's almost as old as the Big Bang itself. The star HD 140283 lies about 190 light-years away in the constellation Libra. Astronomers have long known that it's ancient because it contains mostly hydrogen and helium, which were present at the dawn of the universe, and few of the heavy elements that were later forged in stellar furnaces. With the Hubble Space Telescope, researchers have now pinned down the distance to HD 140283, which allowed them to determine how bright this star is. Along with the chemical composition of the star, the newly derived stellar properties allowed for a new age estimate. The study of HD 140283 in the Astrophysical Journal Letters found that the star is 14.46 billion years old, but the entire universe, as you may have heard, is only 13.77 billion years old. The two age estimates aren't actually in conflict, because there's always some uncertainty. The full age estimate is thus 14.46 billion years, plus or minus 800 million years. Put your money on the minus. Classified advertisements placed by individuals in newspapers and magazines are not covered by the Advertising Standards Authority's Code of Practice. If you happen to buy goods that have been wrongly described in such an advertisement and have lost money as a result, the only thing you can do is bring a case against the person who placed the advertisement for misrepresentation or for breach of contract. In this case, you would use the small claims procedure, which is a relatively cheap way to sue for the recovery of a debt. If you want to pursue a claim, you should take into account whether the person you are suing will be able to pay damages, should any be awarded. Dishonest traders are aware of this and often pose as private sellers to exploit the legal loopholes that exist. That is, they may claim they are not in a position to pay damages.
The choice of stroke depends on how near the shuttlecock is to the net, and whether it is above net height. Players have much better attacking options if they can reach the shuttlecock well above net height, especially if it is also close to the net. In the forecourt, a high shuttlecock will be met with a net kill, hitting it steeply downwards and attempting to win the rally immediately. In the mid-court, a high shuttlecock will be usually met with a powerful smash, also hitting downwards and hoping for an outright winner or a weak reply. Athletic jump smashes, where players jump upwards for a steeper smash angle, are a common and spectacular element of elite men's doubles play. In the rear court, players strive to hit the shuttlecock while it is still above them, rather than allowing it to drop lower. This overhead hitting allows them to play smashes, clears, and drop shots. If the shuttlecock has dropped low, then a smash is impossible and a full-length high clear is difficult.